Hello there, my name's Ruth Crowther from the E-Mental Health in Practice project and also the host of the Digital Mental Health Musings podcast series. So today's conversation is one, I know I always say this, but it's another one I'm really excited to be involved in. I think a lot of our listeners will find this really interesting and hopefully applicable to them, particularly those of you listening who are working or living within our Indigenous communities. So today's guest is David Edwards. Dave, as he will tell you, is a proud Worimi man, and he is the co-director of the WellMob website, which some of you may or may not have heard of. So today's conversation is really going to be a little bit about Dave and his pathway to being involved in WellMob. And we'll talk about the WellMob website and how it came into being, with the overarching theme really being digital mental health resources for our First Nation Australians. So in welcoming Dave to the podcast, welcome, Dave.
Thanks, Ruth. I appreciate you having me on the Digital Mental Health Musings.
I'm wondering if Dave you would be happy to, introduce yourself a little bit more, provide us with a bit of a background. And also, I'm wondering if you would be happy to also do Welcome to Country.
I appreciate that opportunity. Thanks, Ruth. Gujiyigu, or hello, I'm David Edwards. I'm a Worimi man. My ancestral connections are to a place that's now called Port Stephens, or the Karura River, north of Newcastle in Central Coast, New South Wales. I'm happy to give an acknowledgement of country, actually, in my native Guttung language that was passed on to me by my uncle, Stephen Brereton. It's part of my own personal journey of reconnecting with my culture that I didn't have the privilege to grow up with. So I really appreciate Uncle Steve giving me these words to acknowledge country. So Gujiyigu, which is hello, welcome. Minyang Nura Wolbelen, Nura Yigu Marala Baragu, Yi, Wijibu Waibul, Bunjalang Bare, Gatai Niran. So I've just said welcome. Look at all of us. We've come together in this space. I've acknowledged that I'm on Wijibu Waibul, Bunjalung country, which is in Lismore, northern New South Wales, and that we're here together to share and learn. So thanks very much, Ruth, for giving me the opportunity to do acknowledgement of country.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Dave. And also, just to add on to that, I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm on Turrbal country, which is located in the north of Brisbane. So we're sort of a little bit far-flung across the states, but that's okay. That's what makes this interesting. So I guess a really good starting point, Dave, if this sits good with you, before we get into talking about the WellMob Indigenous Wellbeing website, which is really the main topic of today's conversation, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and how you kind of, your journey, if you like, to becoming involved in digital wellbeing and the website?
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. My actual undergrad and background's in ecology, and I spent 25 years actually working to help look after country. And the interesting thing is ecology is all about the interaction of the components of a system that keeps us alive. And that's the soil, the water, the plants, the animals, and how all those ecosystems interact. And I guess in the last several years, I've stepped into the space of Indigenous health and Indigenous health promotion specifically. And that's very much also about how do all the parts of the system contribute to keeping ourselves well and functioning. And it's been a really interesting journey for me to go from an ecology space into a mental health and well-being space, because the principles and philosophies are very similar. It's about all the components interacting to contribute to what the whole is. And what I'm really passionate about in Indigenous health and well-being is about holistic social emotional well-being. And that's something we'll talk about more with the WellMob website, which is all about holistic Indigenous perspectives on health and well-being, and hopefully that all those resources in that space are in the one spot for practitioners to use.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think it's interesting listening to you say that, because I'm not so sure in that we do that sort of holistic perspective taking in non-Indigenous, or work with non-Indigenous. You know, there's very much, you look at a lot of the programs and a lot of it's very much focused on the, you know, the mental health and well-being, but not necessarily with the broader components. So I think perhaps we've got a little bit of distance to go to get there with that. But I think it's really interesting to certainly learn about WellMob and see that holistic approach that you've just talked about. So with that in mind, how did this come into being? You know, what's the backstory of WellMob?
Well, really, I'd have to credit the backstory to the WellMob website to the local Bundjalung Aboriginal health workers. I was involved in one of the electronic mental health and practices project, along with a lot of other colleagues based at the University of Sydney in the University Centre for Rural Health in Lismore, working with Bundjalung Aboriginal health and wellbeing workers about using digital mental health tools in their work. And we were doing workshops that were teaching them how to search, find, and save resources and then use them with their Aboriginal clients. And they said to us in these workshops, why don't you just put all these digital wellbeing resources in the one spot so you don't have to teach us how to search and find them? And that's where the origin or the seed was sown about the WellMob website, that our workforce really wanted to have a one-stop shop of Indigenous specific wellbeing resources to take away the Google search and all the hassle that we find these days, given the online space is just littered with both good and bad resources, and resources that haven't been vetted or seen to be culturally safe or culturally responsive. We've been able to do all that hard work and find all the deadly resources that our mob from across this country has put together and just put them in the one spot. So it's a portal for our workers to be able to find them easily and then integrate them within their practice. So all the credit goes to the local Bundjalung Aboriginal workers that were parts of learning circles and reference groups and advisory groups that came up with this idea to develop the website. And then we were lucky to also, during the website development phase, be able to engage Aboriginal health and wellbeing workers from across the country, particularly in Kaurna country in Adelaide, and Larrakia country in Darwin, as well as here in Bundjalung country in Lismore, northern New South Wales, to guide us on the journey of making sure we developed this website in a way that met their needs. So that was culturally appealing, easy to use, easy to find resources, and then to share them with their clients.
So very much a sort of bottom-up, community-led project.
Very much so. And we've just put together, my colleagues, Professor James Bennett-Levy and Dr. Judy Singh have just put together a paper around that process. So look out for that in the coming months.
Fantastic. We will, and we'll post that when that gets published. In line with that, you just mentioned, you know, the internet is littered with such a huge amount of information. I'm wondering, where do you begin? There's the intention to create this fantastic resource. How do you begin selecting what goes in there?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Ruth. I guess that's probably been our biggest responsibility, and one that we don't take lightly, of making sure any resource we do link to the WellMob website is culturally appropriate and culturally responsive. And we know a lot of the material that we've curated for the website is probably for that low intensity intervention sort of stage, rather than for acute mental health care. And some of those low intensity resources that we've been able to find are very much around how do we tap into videos and other narrative-based resources, which is what our culture is based on. It's around story, to help keep our mob strong, rather than looking at fixing a problem or dealing with symptoms. I mean, there's definitely resources on there around mental health and some of the symptomatic issues that our people might present in a health context with. But there's a lot of resources there that are around connecting to music and stories and other people's journey and language, all those things that, as we were talking about before, make up that big picture Indigenous social emotional well-being. And I think the main sort of responsibility we had was how can we just put them together under a very easy to use interface. And in the website, we've got 6 main topics: mind, body, healing, keeping safe, culture, and then one we call Our Mob, which is all about the subpopulation groups, I guess, for want of a better term, in our communities, such as our men, our women, our young people, our gender diverse mob, parents, etc. So we've tried to make it very topic based and very culturally focused. So practitioners and their clients can easily find stuff that might help them keep strong, help them connect to their culture, and as well as some of those resources that might just help explain some of the mental health and other wellbeing issues they're dealing with.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. There's a huge amount of resources on there. Do you have any idea how many it links to?
I think about 239 at last
count.
There you go. Yeah, and it's growing all the time as people are, I think, becoming a bit more savvy in this technologically world that we live in. People are developing community-based resources, and whether that's just a video of a yarn around a certain topic, or whether it's a school group doing a music video about the things that keep them strong and maybe say no to drugs and other sort of health promotion messages. I think our communities and particularly Aboriginal community controlled health services are getting really savvy in this space of developing online resources and there's lots of great printable resources out there too, like PDFs that can be used as fact sheets or brochures to give to Indigenous clients, or posters to put in waiting rooms that are developed by local Aboriginal communities, and which we all know we have a real diverse mob out there. Like we call ourselves one mob, but we have different ways of doing business. We have different health issues. We have different wellbeing aspirations. And I think it's really important to have a look on WellMob and see if there's anything specific for your area, as there are more and more resources being developed by our local communities.
Yeah. And in line with that, we'll, for those people who are listening who haven't maybe had a chance to see the WellMob site yet, we'll put the link up so you can get through. And I strongly recommend jumping in and having a look around the site. It's really, really straightforward to navigate to the areas you're interested in.
Yeah, our URL is wellmob.org.au.
Before we talk a little bit about, how people are using WellMob, what are people telling you? So it was launched, June last year? I think middle of last year, wasn't it, the launch of WellMob?
Yes. Yeah.
What kind of feedback are you getting?
Anecdotal feedback is great. Like everyone's saying, it's so refreshing to just be able to look at one website to find Indigenous specific wellbeing resources, as opposed to go down the rabbit hole of Google search. And often, when people do a search on a topic and put Aboriginal in there can be some negative information come up, and it's often the statistics around our overrepresentation in various mental health and other wellbeing disease and issues. With WellMob, I guess our users can be confident that the resources there have been vetted, that they are culturally safe and culturally responsive, and that they're useful. We make sure anything that goes on there, we think this has an application for a practitioner or worker to use with their client, or just an Aboriginal person that's looking for something that might fill up a gap in their knowledge or their needs around well-being. And so hopefully the website just makes it a lot easier for people to find appropriate resources.
Yeah. In your sort of searching through what's available on the wide interweb, were you coming across a wealth of information that perhaps was not appropriate, not helpful?
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of, us mob call it probably wallpapering, a lot of resources and mainstream mental health organisations that do try and do some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander specific mental health spaces and resources in the digital world. But often it's just a bit of artwork, and there's a big difference between, I guess, a resource that's made for and by our mob as opposed to just made for us by someone who's non-Indigenous. You know, we do have unique ways of being and doing and knowing, and I kind of think it's very easy for most of our mob to actually identify if something's just been adapted to make it more culturally appealing, as opposed to comes from a space of wanting to be culturally based and culturally safe. And I think a lot of the resources we have on WellMob, whether it's a podcast or a video or an app, we make sure that they are, you know, principally designed and made for Aboriginal community.
So I guess moving on, it would be really handy, I think, for people listening to get a sense of ways in which WellMob can be used as a resource for people. So that could be from either, you know, from the perspective of somebody working within the community or from a consumer perspective. You're able to kind of give us a bit of sense of what that might look like.
Yeah, I guess I'll answer that in two parts. And for our workers, some of the feedback we're particularly getting that's really good is from our non-Indigenous workforce. And let's face it, you know, probably 80% plus of our health and wellbeing workforce are non-Indigenous. And what they're saying is, we really love the training materials that are on there. There's actually a tab in the top drop-down menu in the top header of the landing page that is for training materials. And there's a lot of materials there that just help our workers build on their cultural competency around Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health issues, and, you know, help them with their professional development. So that's one really practical way our non-Indigenous workforce can use WellMob. For our Indigenous workforce, there's also some really good self-care resources for our Aboriginal workers, because we wear lots of different hats and in our communities, and our work never stops, whether we clock off at 5 o'clock when it comes to health and well-being. So there's a lot of stuff we need to use ourselves to keep ourselves in a good space. And there's some great self-care resources of workers sharing, you know, their story on a video about how they keep themselves well under the pressures of working in mental health. Also for our, I guess, Indigenous clients or customers or consumers that are out there, there's some really great resources that they can navigate through the website, particularly under the mind topic or the healing or culture topics, that can just be integrated into their other health and wellbeing practices. You know, whether it's an app to maybe count your drinks to cut down your drinking, or whether it's a something that's more of a I guess a planning tool to set your goals. I mean, we certainly MPRAC promote the Menzies School of Health Research app called Stay Strong. So that's something either a practitioner or a consumer can use to talk about what keeps them strong, what are some of the things that are their worries, who keeps them strong, and then to start doing some goal setting. So that's a great resource for either a consumer or a practitioner to use to do some basic goal setting around their health and wellbeing. So lots of really useful resources, whether you're a practitioner or community worker, or you're just a consumer, an Aboriginal person wanting to find some culturally specific resources to help with your wellbeing.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Dave, do you find, now with the sort of the Head to Health website, where often practitioners will work in collaboration with whoever they're working with and go, let's have a search on here, see what's relevant. Are you finding that WellMob's been used in a similar way as a, let's have a look at this site, let's see what we can find that's of use for you?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we are actually doing a impact and evaluation, and we'll be touching base with some of our practitioners and workforce about how they use WellMob in session and out of session in their day-to-day work. But definitely some of the anecdotal feedback we're getting from health workers is that, you know, to be able to sit down with a client in front of the PC or tablet or laptop and show them a resource and talk about it, and some of the feedback is really good around sensitive issues, whether it is substance misuse, say, the example of drinking too much. There's a great video there called Grog Brain that a practitioner can sit down with whether it's a young person or not, and watch an animated video that's only 3 minutes long that talks about the effects of alcohol on the brain and how too much alcohol can really affect, lots of our physical and mental health. So really good resources that can be used in session to show in plain language and easy to understand terms what some of these complex issues, health issues are, and maybe get a better rapport with their Indigenous client. I think the whole thing of being able to sit in front of a third party resource, like looking at a screen and watching a video together, can take away that shame factor around a sensitive topic, and a very useful way for a non-Indigenous practitioner to engage with an Indigenous client is to be able to have that sort of comfortable space where they can build a rapport and just have a yarn about a topic, as opposed to having to eyeball someone and talk about some sensitive topics.
We're currently in this really weird pandemic time. There's a section on the website, COVID specific, I think.
Yeah, listen, we've got a link on our landing page in a banner across the top of the website that links to COVID specific resources, and that's with Gaia Dewey website, which has got some really good community focused COVID safety PDFs and posters and fact sheets, as well as to the Australian Indigenous Health Infonet, who helped us develop the website and manage the website. They've got some COVID specific resources. So yeah, we've definitely linked to those resources that are out there to help our mob through these more than challenging times with COVID restrictions and health issues associated with that. But very much WellMob's around social emotional wellbeing and mental health, and therefore we don't necessarily curate our own resources with respect to understanding the COVID pandemic.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, because obviously you'll kind of have a look at the analytics around this, and mindful that the website launched during COVID anyway. With what's happening currently in New South Wales, do you know if you're seeing a bit of a spike in usage of the website, or is it too early to tell?
Yeah, listen, I think it's probably a bit of both. There's definitely been a spike of usage during from our launch onwards because of this more challenging time we're living in. But also there's a bit of a saturation of online tools out there around mental health that have been launched probably quicker than usual to try and make sure there are some supports out there for our community that don't have as easy access to face-to-face mental health support. And as I mentioned at the start of this yarn, it's really that low intensity intervention stuff and health promotion stuff that we're hosting on the WellMob website. But our analytics are really showing us that there's high uptake of WellMob from right across the country, but particularly in the eastern states, which probably represents where the majority of our population live anyway, and certainly where the majority of our health workforces are. But generally across the board, some really high uptake. We'd love to, specifically work with certain regions that are developing resources and make sure if anyone does develop something that's not on WellMob, they use a contact form on the landing page of the website to suggest a resource, and that way we can have a look at it, make sure it meets our criteria, that it's appropriate, and we'll quickly get that uploaded so others can benefit from it.
I guess in line with that, can you give us a quick sense of what that criteria looks like, just for people wondering what it is that sort of gets the resource onto the website and who have legitimate concerns around, quality, safety, etc.?
Yeah, listen, the main stuff is that there's no information that might be inappropriate for younger people. Also that there's no resources that are put there that might trigger people who have traumas. But generally that to make sure that the resource is culturally safe and culturally responsive. That's our main sort of criteria. I think there's a whole range of other issues consumers need to be aware of around data privacy and security. There's more and more of your, habits and use patterns on any online forum that can be tracked, and in this day and age where cookies are now becoming basically a necessary part to use websites or online services. Just important that consumers are aware that, if they do enter personal data into any website, that, you just need to make sure how that data is going to be managed and that it's going to be secure. So that's probably just a little tip for most of us in this online world, to just make sure any personal information we enter into a website, there is a privacy and data security policy for that website.
Yeah. COVID's accelerated people's willingness to engage in online technologies, or do you think the will was there previously?
I think it's definitely helped, but both our workforce and our communities engage more in the online space for our well-being, principally because, our access to services has probably been restricted no matter where you live, whether you're in the city or country. A lot of our rural remote areas have fly-in, fly-out health workers, and, the face-to-face availability of those workers has been impacted by travel restrictions, right through to people losing work because of the pandemic and having these additional stresses that might trigger issues that have been kept contained during the normal process of life. This is the time where I think our relationships are stretched. I think it's, really challenging times that we live in, and I think more and more people are looking for supports that are out there that might help them sort of reflect on that they're okay. They're going to be okay relative to other people in this world. A lot of us are very fortunate, and I think we've just got to stick together and use the online space positively. Our communities are still very, into social media platforms to try and stay connected in these times of travel restrictions. It's very difficult to attend sorry business or celebrations because of the travel restrictions. So you can connect through social media, keep in touch with people in your community, and a lot of us live off country. So I think a lot of us are using social media more in a positive way to connect back to our culture and country if we're not actually living on the land that our ancestors are from. So there's lots of different ways I think people are getting a bit more engaged in the digital space to help their well-being.
What are your thoughts around kind of projecting forward? There's this conversation happening around the shadow pandemic of mental health coming out of what's happening at the moment, on mental health issues. Let's just jump forward, I don't know, 3-5 years. Where would you like to see, WellMob, online resources? How can you see that sort of fitting in with where we seem to be evolving at the moment? Big question, sorry.
Yeah, it is a big question, but probably the two things that just spring to mind are, I'd like to see our practitioners and health workforce better utilize some of the resources that are online. It's great that we've got all these deadly resources that our mob from across the country have developed, and we've just done the simple job of putting them into a one-stop shop website. But what's it look like to actually integrate them in practice? And I talked about some examples of using videos with a client to help explain information, PDFs and printables being able to be given to people, and practitioners and workers being able to refer online resources to their clients to use out of session. They're all practical ways we can better utilize digital mental health. But we're really keen to try and see into the future of training our up and coming health and wellbeing workforce, through working with students to better understand what the digital mental health and social emotional wellbeing landscape looks like, as well as our existing workers with their professional development. We hope to do some accredited online courses that can help our workers get across how digital mental health can be utilized better in their work. So that's one area. And secondly, for our consumers, I really think our communities, as I mentioned before, are getting much more excited about developing their own regional or locally based online resources that help their well-being. And whether it's from something that around the tragedy of dealing with suicide or suicide prevention space, through to more just health promotion material that often our communities gravitate towards information that's made by people they know and made in the landscape and country that they're familiar with. So I hope in the future there's going to be more funding and more provision for our local communities to come up with their own solutions and their own health promotion online resources.
Yeah, it feels like we've come such a long way in this space, but it's almost as if we've got to that point now with, okay, it needs to take the next step just for these type of materials to become routinely just integrated, just business as usual. You know, like social media for a lot of people is business as usual. Yes. Technology's developed so quickly and so much of it has become just the norm for us. We need to kind of shift this.
Yeah. Yeah. Who would have thought we'd be recording a Zoom, discussion that was going to be used as an online resource for our workforce. And, in this Zoom room that we're so familiar with now, or other meeting video conferencing platforms, the ability to share your screen, to share a resource, that's a really useful way of doing business and getting a message across. So I think we're going to, I think we've learned a lot through this pandemic, and we're very good at adapting, us humans. So I really hope to see we continue to adapt using digital mental health in our work and our own self-care and well-being.
Yeah. Just one quick question, because I'm mindful we're probably getting towards the end. You mentioned there's the mind component or section of the WellMob site. And I think that links through to some apps, given now sort of sit in the broader mental health in practice. I think it'd be really handy just to get a quick overview from you, if possible, as to what some of those look like. So the specific mind, mental health and well-being apps that are available.
Yeah. The good thing about WellMob is, for instance, you've got the 6 topics I mentioned before on the landing page. And if you go into the mind topic, you can actually use the filter search to search specifically for an app. So you can just go apps in mind, and there's a range of subtopics in there, whether it's like anxiety or worries or depression. You could look for a specific app to help you with those particular issues. And some of the apps there, I mentioned Stay Strong for both practitioners and users to do some goal setting. Yep. There's also a great self-help or self-management app called iBobbly that the Black Dog Institute have developed, which is definitely one of these grassroots, Indigenous-led, Indigenous developed app that is very useful for an Indigenous person to just load on their phone, do regular check-ins. There's some really good resources on there, all available as audio. So you just click on an icon and it talks to you and talks you through some strategies that might be useful for you to reflect on how you're feeling. Some good check-in apps there also. Beyond Blue have a non-Indigenous specific one called Check-In, which is easy to remember. That's great for young people just to check in how they're feeling. So there's heaps of apps being developed, good mindfulness apps out there that some of them starting to tap into some of our Indigenous ways of mindfulness, whether it's Dadiri or other cultural practices of just being still, listening to country, connecting to culture. So a whole range of applications that might be suitable to anyone that wants to explore. And that's probably my take-home message for workers and practitioners is take some time to explore WellMob and take some time to explore and understand some key resources that might just be common issues that you deal with that you can use in your work. And it doesn't have to be anxiety, depression, or substance misuse, but maybe get an understanding of some of the resources that are out there for your Indigenous clients to help keep them strong. And, some of the stuff around language and music and story and healing, some of the stuff that is that more positive narrative that I think our mob really gravitate towards. So, yeah, don't be afraid, just have a go, try and spend 15 minutes a week just exploring what's on WellMob and other websites such as Electronic Mental Health and Practice to try and sort of see what you might be able to use in both your professional development or self-care or with your Indigenous clients.
Yeah, and I guess it's supporting the community to know that this is there. Obviously, the practitioners and health workers are key to that. For people who are interested in just having a look at this for their own personal use, how do they go about it? Is it a search or?
Yeah, listen, if you just, even on your browser on your smartphone, it's mobile responsive. So search wellmob.org.au in your browser, and you'll be presented with a search bar and all the 6 topics I mentioned before: mind, body, our mob, healing, and culture. And just have a look at what some of the subtopics under those topics are. We're also developing a couple of videos, that just short 1-minute animated videos that are really simple, culturally engaging, to explain what WellMob's about. So once we have them, Ruth, we'll share them through the Electronic Mental Health and Practice website, as well as we'll post them onto the WellMob website. But just feel free to have a look. You can even save the WellMob website as an icon or a shortcut on your mobile device, so you don't need to go through a browser. So that's another little tip that my colleague Taylor Laurie has put on our Facebook post. So yeah, follow us on Facebook.
Yep.
We'll make sure we post these videos in the next couple of months on our YouTube channel, and be sure to recommend or suggest a resource that you think would be really useful to have on WellMob if it's not already there.
Fantastic. So we'll make sure we also post the Facebook link for people who are wanting to follow that. And I think that probably brings us to the end. I was going to ask you for top tips, but you gave us that before. So we've got that covered. Is there anything else, Dave, that you think it's important to kind of cover here? Or I think
No, listen, I appreciate the time we've spent today just to start to unpack how WellMob can be used to find culturally specific wellbeing resources, and yeah, and hope to recommend your audience to look at the MPRAC resources, of the fact sheets you guys have developed, and some of these podcasts, which are really interesting, particularly to put on your device when you're driving, in the background there, to listen to some really interesting content around digital mental health. So thanks for the time to talk about WellMob today, Ruth.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Dave. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on and to learn about WellMob. So thank you.